What is war? If you compressed thousands of years of warfare into one timeline, you would notice something strange. Chariots gave way to cavalry. Cavalry faced guns. Then came machine guns, tanks, aircraft, missiles, satellites, and drones. The weapons kept changing, but the things that really decided war did not. Who could strike from farther away? Who could move faster? Who could organize more people? And today, who can find the enemy first and make a decision faster? Seen this way, the history of war is really one long competition over firepower, speed, organization, and information. And it all begins with the chariot. During the Bronze Age, metal weapons became increasingly common, but the most expensive and strategically important weapon was the chariot. At the time, fully developed cavalry forces did not yet exist, so people harnessed horses to wheeled vehicles and used them to carry warriors quickly across the battlefield. A single chariot required horses, a vehicle, weapons, a driver, and trained fighters. Ordinary farmers could not afford that. So, Bronze Age warfare was in many ways a war for elites. The number of chariots a kingdom could maintain was also a rough sign of how much economic and military power it had. Around 1274 BC, Egypt and the Hittite Empire fought the famous Battle of Kadesh. Hittite chariots suddenly smashed into part of the Egyptian army. The Egyptians were caught off guard. Their formation broke down, and Pharaoh Rameses II was briefly placed in serious danger. The Egyptians eventually regrouped and fought back. The battle was fierce, but neither side was able to completely destroy the other. And Kadesh exposed a major weakness of chariot warfare. Chariots were fast and powerful, but they were also expensive, complicated, and heavily dependent on terrain and formation. War needed something cheaper, something more reliable, something that could be organized on a much larger scale. The answer was infantry. From this point on, the main competition in war slowly began to shift. It was no longer only about who could afford the most expensive weapons. It was about who could organize the most people. As iron tools and weapons became more widespread, armies could equip larger numbers of soldiers. War slowly stopped being the game of a small warrior elite. More ordinary people entered the battlefield. Greek hoplites pushed this idea to a new level. They carried spears and round shields and stood shoulder to shoulder in tight formations. Individual bravery still mattered, but it was no longer the most important thing. The most important thing was simple: do not break formation. At the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, disciplined Greek citizen soldiers showed that an organized infantry force could defeat the army of a powerful empire. Later, the Romans took organization even further. Their armies used more flexible formations. They built roads. They developed military engineering and logistics. Men, food, weapons, and orders could keep moving toward the front. War was shifting away from individual heroism. Organization was becoming the real source of strength. But infantry had one problem. It was strong, but it was slow. In AD 378, the Eastern Roman army suffered a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Adrianople. Gothic cavalry played an important role in the fighting. That did not mean cavalry suddenly replaced infantry, but it did reveal another factor that was becoming more important: mobility. By the Middle Ages, heavily armored knights had become one of the most recognizable forces on European battlefields. But across the Eurasian steppe, a very different type of cavalry warfare was developing. These riders did not depend on heavy armor. They depended on speed. Mongol cavalry could move quickly and shoot from a distance. You chased them, they pulled back. You stopped, they came back. And the moment your formation began to fall apart, they attacked. The Battle of Legnica in 1241 is a classic example. European knights were at their best in a direct charge. The Mongols tried not to give them that kind of fight. They moved, withdrew, divided enemy forces, and drew some of the cavalry away from supporting infantry. Once the formation stretched out, the Mongols reorganized and attacked again. The most important lesson was not whose armor was stronger. It was who controlled the distance of the fight. The central competition in war had moved again, from organization to speed and mobility. But every military system that looks unbeatable eventually meets something that exposes its weakness. And the next major change gave ordinary soldiers a relatively cheap way to threaten elite knights. Gunpowder. A skilled knight could take years to train. His armor, horse, weapons, and equipment cost a fortune, but an ordinary soldier could be trained to use a firearm much more quickly. War began to shift from who has the best warriors to who can produce more weapons and train more people to use them. The Battle of Pavia in 1525 became one of the clearest symbols of that transition. France had some of the most famous heavy cavalry in Europe, but they faced a new military system built around arquebusiers, pikemen, cavalry, and artillery working together. The French cavalry suffered heavy losses. King Francis I of France was even captured. Knights did not disappear overnight, but the direction of warfare had changed. Individual skill was beginning to give way to firepower. Then came flintlock muskets, bayonets, and permanent standing armies. Armies became larger, and larger armies created larger problems. Tens of thousands of soldiers had to eat every day. Guns needed powder, cannons needed ammunition. War was no longer testing only the skill of generals. It was testing the entire state. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Factories could produce guns, artillery, and ammunition on a massive scale. Railways could move large numbers of soldiers and supplies quickly. The telegraph could send orders across hundreds of miles. The main competition in war was shifting again. It was no longer just about how strong an army was. It was about how much power an entire country could produce and mobilize. At the same time, breech-loading rifles, repeating weapons, and machine guns caused firepower to explode. World War I pushed this contradiction to the extreme. The attacker was still made of flesh and blood, but defensive firepower had become industrial. Machine guns, barbed wire, heavy artillery, trenches. Together, they turned frontal attacks into killing grounds. Machines had entered the battlefield, but the war itself had stopped moving. After World War I, armies faced the same problem. Firepower had become stronger and stronger, but movement had become harder and harder. Tanks already existed. So did aircraft, motor vehicles, and radios. The real breakthrough was not inventing one more weapon. It was learning how to connect them. The Battle of France in 1940 showed what that could mean. German armored formations pushed through the Ardennes and broke through Allied defenses. Tanks moved forward quickly. Motorized infantry followed. Radios kept units connected. Aircraft attacked roads, transport hubs, and frontline targets. France had tanks too. That was not the real problem. The problem was that the Germans combined multiple technologies into a faster moving system. Once the front was broken, forces behind it often had little time to reorganize. Large Allied formations were pushed toward Dunkirk. Paris fell soon after. France was defeated in a matter of weeks. In the age of mechanized warfare, the competition was no longer just about individual weapons. It was about how quickly different forces could work together. World War II also proved that modern war increasingly depended on industry, oil, population, technology, transportation, and organization. And in 1945, humanity created the most extreme product of industrial warfare, the atomic bomb. Nuclear weapons created a strange new situation. Weapons became more powerful than ever before. But because they were so powerful, major powers became more afraid to use them directly. If two nuclear-armed countries fought an all-out war, the idea of victory itself could become meaningless. So the Cold War created a bizarre balance. The greatest value of the most powerful weapon on Earth was not using it. A new factor had entered warfare: deterrence. The United States and the Soviet Union tried to avoid direct total war. Instead, they competed through nuclear deterrence, alliances, and proxy conflicts. Meanwhile, missiles, jet aircraft, satellites, and electronics kept advancing. And another question became increasingly important. It was no longer simply, can my weapon shoot farther than yours? It became, can I find you before you find me? The 1991 Gulf War showed the world what that kind of information advantage could do. Iraq had a huge ground force. It had tanks. It had defensive positions. But the US-led coalition held a massive advantage in air power, electronics, and intelligence. Stealth aircraft, cruise missiles, and precision-guided weapons struck command centers, air defense systems, and communications. Electronic warfare suppressed radar. Reconnaissance systems searched for targets. The real change was not simply that bombs had become more accurate, it was that the entire chain, finding a target, passing the information, making a decision, and launching an attack, was becoming faster. In the information age, the central question became, who sees whom first? Because if you cannot see the enemy, while the enemy always knows where you are, it may not matter how many tanks you have. You could be hit before you ever see the other side. But information superiority was not a magic solution. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq exposed another problem. High technology can help answer the question, how do we destroy the target? But it cannot always answer a harder one. Who is the target? Then the war in Ukraine, which began in 2022, revealed an even stranger picture. On one side, you see satellites, electronic warfare, FPV drones, and digital reconnaissance systems. On the other, you see trenches, minefields, artillery positions, and long wars of attrition. So, why does a battlefield filled with modern technology sometimes look so much like World War I? One reason is that the battlefield has become increasingly transparent. Drones and other reconnaissance systems make large troop movements and vehicle concentrations easier to detect, and once they are detected, they can be hit by artillery or drones. Information technology was supposed to make warfare faster, but when both sides have increasingly powerful surveillance systems, large-scale movement can actually become more dangerous. And so an old pattern returns. Defense becomes stronger, attacking becomes more expensive, and war once again slides toward attrition. More than a century ago, World War I suffered from an excess of firepower. Today, dense firepower and dense information are combining to shrink the amount of space in which forces can move safely. The technology is completely different, but the battlefield produces a strange echo of the past. At the same time, cheap drones are rewriting the economics of war. 500 years ago, firearms gave ordinary soldiers a way to threaten expensive knights. Today, drones are repeating a surprisingly similar story. And now, artificial intelligence is beginning to enter the same system. A drone finds a target, sensors confirm its location, AI helps identify it, a command system selects a weapon. Then, the strike begins. A process that once required many people, multiple departments, and large amounts of communication is being compressed. So the next competition in war may no longer be simply who sees the enemy first. It may be who can decide first. Look back across thousands of years of warfare and a clear pattern appears. In the age of chariots, the advantage went to those who could afford expensive weapons. In the age of infantry, it went to those who could organize more people. In the age of cavalry, speed and distance mattered more. In the gunpowder age, firepower became the key. In the industrial age, it was factories, railways, and national mobilization. In mechanized war, it was the speed of coordination between different forces. In the nuclear age, it became deterrence. In the information age, it became who could find the enemy first. And today, warfare may be moving toward the next step. Who can move fastest from detection to judgment to decision to attack? From chariots to drones, weapons have changed again and again. But the evolution of war has kept pushing in the same directions. Strike from farther away, move faster, organize more people, and shorten the time between finding the enemy and attacking them. Thousands of years ago, a warrior usually had to see his enemy with his own eyes before he could attack. Today, someone can sit thousands of miles away and take part in a strike through satellites and drones. But no matter how much the weapons change, war still begins with human interests, human choices, and human will. Technology changes the distance, speed, and scale of war. It does not answer the question of why humans choose to fight in the first place. But now a new question is beginning to appear. What happens if observation, judgment, and action are increasingly handed over to machines? If machines can find targets faster than humans, judge threats faster than humans, and even take part in deciding whether to attack, then how much of the final decision in war will still belong to us?